All right, everybody, welcome. Good afternoon. My name is Father Pius Pietrek. I am the Vice Chairman of the Board of Directors of the Legal Services Corporation. This is my first time in Madison, and it really is a pleasure to be here. Beautiful, beautiful town, beautiful city. You know, I'm not always the Vice Chairman. I suppose I'm always the Vice Chairman, but my day job, I'm a Dominican priest living in New York City. I was born in Detroit, grew up in Phoenix, went to law school in Chicago. I have lived in big cities. But my first assignment as a priest was to a small parish in Zanesville, Ohio. If you've never heard of it, don't worry, neither has anybody else. But it's a small town like many small towns in the Midwest, rural, with a dispersed population. It is a wonderful place. I enjoyed the people in Zanesville a great deal. But like every place in the country, every place in the world, it has its own problems, and it has its own challenges in being in a rural area. Much like Wisconsin, it was populated by German dairy farmers. Should sound familiar to you all, and yet the population is decreasing and getting older, and although near the city of Columbus has fewer and fewer lawyers in it. And that's our task today, and that's what we're talking about today. And so our event tonight, this afternoon, is Rural Reach, access to justice that meets people where they are. And this title that we've given it is quite deliberate, to recognize the importance of talking to people in rural areas about rural issues. And I've served, along with Rebecca Rapp here, as the co-chair of the task force on rural justice. And for the past 4 years, we've been examining this issue, not just Rebecca and I, but a whole team of people, a whole group of people in a variety of areas all over the country, to talk about the difference between the legal problems of rural Americas and their ability to get the help they need to solve these problems. We've explored rural communities, studied the data, interviewed local practitioners. And the results of these efforts, of all of these years of efforts, we've compiled into a report. Maybe not all of them, we've cultivated it a little bit, otherwise it would be about 500 pages. And we're proud to be releasing that report today. You can visit lsc.gov/rural to download the report or scan the QR code. I'm trying to think, I think this one has it here. So if you've got the postcard and the QR code, then you can scan that to get a copy of the report. And to mark this milestone, I think it's important for me to recognize some of the people who have been essential in putting this report together. The first is Ascendium Educational Group, the leadership of Rebecca Rapp, my longtime friend, as well as co-chair on the task force. And you'll get to meet her momentarily. She will MC our event tonight. Her colleagues, I cannot tell you the amount of support that we've gotten from them in the production of this report. They have been incredibly generous with their time and with their services for us. In-kind support, communications, graphic design, you name it, they were involved in it. And a special... Before I became a priest, I was a lawyer, and one of my summers I worked at a great law firm called Quarles & Brady in their office in Phoenix, Arizona. And I'm glad to be working again with Quarles & Brady, who were our partners in this task force, and their leadership, especially from their national pro bono partner, Michael Levy, their pro bono director, Dawn Caldert, partners Cindy Fowler and Pilar Thomas, and the retired partner, Fred Grants, and the associates Grace Stewart and Caitlin Slack. And if I mispronounce those, I'm sorry, I'm terrible with names. But the Quarles & Brady has been an important legal anchor for us, important in the support that they've given to the production of our report. And they were just a part of the more than 50 members of our Rural Justice Task Force, a dedicated group of issue experts, practitioners from across the country, Alaska to Arkansas. And so for those of you who are here, who are members of the task force, could you please stand now if you were a member of the task force so we can all give you a round of applause. Another important partner for us in this whole project was the Frontline Justice, led by the incomparable Nicole Nelson. We're grateful for the incredible amount of leadership and insight and vision that Frontline has given to us throughout this whole process. We've also got some other people here that we're grateful for. I think Jean Brody is here, the Director for Outreach for the local senator, U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin. We're grateful for her presence here, as well as Chandler Denhart, the Field Director for U.S. Representative Mark Pocan. So we're grateful for, we recognize at LSC that Congress is our funder, and we're grateful for those from Congress who take such an interest in the work that we do. This event marks for us a real beginning, not an end, of our work on rural access to rural justice, on the important commitment to addressing the legal problems that rural Americans face. And the program today will touch on a variety of issues at play when it comes to access to justice in rural areas. But you'll hear a key theme throughout this whole afternoon. The solutions to the rural justice gap are already happening within rural communities and with people in rural areas. And we all have much to learn from their experiences to propel our work forward. Now, we'll turn things over to Rebecca, who will lead us for the rest of the afternoon. But before I do that, I need to make a couple of acknowledgments. First, to the LSC Board of Directors, which I am very grateful to have been a member of for these past 15 years. We have two of our board members with us here today, and for all the members of the LSC Board whose leadership led us to beginning this task force. Also to LSC's leadership team, to Ron Flagg and Lynn Jennings, who are both here in particular, somewhere I've seen them, there they are. There's Ron, and then Lynn is there, over there, back there. Thank you for your leadership, for your tenacity in bringing this together over these 4 years. And then for our hosts today, both our program and event planning here at the Overture Center. Thank you for your hospitality. Thank you for making such a beautiful location for us to present this report. And last, and certainly not least, is the most important things of all. I think I can say without contradiction that we would not have this task force or this report if it weren't for the incredible, indefatigable leadership and work of Jessica Wechter at LSC. Jessica, where are you hiding? So Jessica is over there. She has really been the force behind this entire project. She is the face of this report in so many ways, and she normally likes to say hidden, but I will make sure that for at least for a moment, a little light shines on her so you can all see the brilliance that we get to see at LSC every day. Jessica, thank you. And now for our program, and I invite Rebecca Rapp to come up and join us for the rest of the program.
Thank you so much, Father Pius. Welcome to Wisconsin, all of those who have traveled far and wide. Welcome also to all of those of you, like me, who just came down the street and are here. I'm so glad each of you is here today. My name is Rebecca Rapp, and I'm honored to serve as your MC this afternoon. I'm the General Counsel and Chief Privacy Officer at Ascendium, and I've also had the privilege of co-chairing the Rural Justice Task Force. I'm grateful to Ascendium and to our partners, Legal Services Corporation and Quarles & Brady, for making this event possible. There are lots of people who have done lots and lots to make the task force and this event happen, but I'd like to give a particular shout out to our conductors, two brilliant and amazing people who have kept all the trains running on time to get us where we are here today. LSC's Jessica Wechter, who Father Pius just mentioned, and I'd also like to mention my colleague Katie Chu, who has really been incredible helping keep things going. We're all in for a treat today. This afternoon, we'll explore what it really takes to close the rural justice gap through myth-busting conversations, data-driven insights, and most importantly, stories from the people powering rural justice every day. The insights may come from rural America, but they have lots to teach us about increasing access to justice everywhere, in rural and urban areas alike. Now, this event is a celebration of the Rural Justice Task Force report and the people, communities, and innovations highlighted in it. But it is also a call to action. This report's power lies not in its publication, but in what happens next. And that depends on you. Yes, you. You are a robust crowd of august people. As you participate today and read the task force report, I challenge you to think about what you can do individually and collectively to implement what you learn. So I expect all of you to walk out of here not only with inspiration and doggy bags with whatever food is left after the reception, but concrete to-do lists. And speaking of august people, to get us started today, I'm pleased to welcome someone who embodies Wisconsin's strong tradition of public service, Justice Rebecca Frank Dallett of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Justice Dallett has served on the Wisconsin Supreme Court since 2018. Immediately before joining the court, she served as a Milwaukee County Circuit Court judge, associate dean of the Wisconsin Judicial College, and an adjunct professor at Marquette Law School. Justice Dallett is deeply committed to expanding access to justice and serves as the Supreme Court's liaison to Wisconsin's Access to Justice Commission. We are so grateful that she agreed to participate in some of our early planning discussions and give our opening remarks today. Please join in me in welcoming to the stage Justice Rebecca Frank Dallett.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here with so many colleagues and partners who share the same goal, making sure justice isn't just promised, but delivered. Thank you again to our hosts, Legal Services Corporation, Ascendium Education Group, Quarles and Brady, and Frontline Justice for bringing us together today. And thank you to everyone here and those joining online for the work you do every day to help people across this country access justice when they need it most. I also want to acknowledge that the land on which we are gathered, this land that we love, where we live, work, and seek to do justice, is part of the traditional and contemporary homelands of the Ho-Chunk people, a place their nation has called Teejop for centuries. This acknowledgement is a step on a continuing journey to learn, to understand, and to be in responsible relationship with history. Today, we honor and respect the sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other Indigenous First Nations within what is now the state of Wisconsin. Our state court system and sovereign tribal courts each serve vital roles in ensuring equal access to justice for the people in these lands. In acknowledging the sacredness of this place and its history, I want to affirm a responsibility to strengthen collaboration between our justice systems and to ensure that our courts are accessible and fair to all communities. Wisconsin is a fitting place to have the conversation about rural access to justice. Across our state and across our nation, we're seeing a widening gap between where lawyers live and where legal help is needed. Here in Wisconsin, 3 out of 4 attorneys live in just 3 of the most populated counties, Dane, Milwaukee, and Waukesha. That leaves large parts of our state where people simply can't find a lawyer when they need one. And we can see the results of this attorney shortage, particularly in rural areas, is that people are not having their legal problems resolved. As you'll read in the LSC's report from the Rural Justice Task Force, it indicates that more than 77% of low-income rural households experienced at least one civil legal problem last year, and that these households did not receive any or enough legal help to address those problems 94% of the time. The costs of this attorney shortage are substantial. Domestic abuse victims have to figure out how to file a restraining order, and if they're even able to do so, must often face their abusers alone. Veterans are unable to secure benefits. Families can lose their homes, either through eviction or foreclosure. Parents can lose custody of their children. The ripple effects of all of these losses impact our entire community. The entire justice system suffers as well. Cases that should take one hearing stretch into several as individuals try to navigate unfamiliar rules and procedures on their own. People ultimately can lose faith in the fairness of the system and its ability to resolve their problems. I will never forget a trial I presided over when I was a circuit court judge in Milwaukee County. It involved a man who was being evicted from his apartment, and he had no money to hire an attorney. He was able to use the Legal Help Center in the Milwaukee County Courthouse to file his lawsuit, but he had no help in trying his case. At trial, he described his apartment as having a broken toilet, a leaking ceiling, and otherwise in dire need of repair. But he had taken no photographs and was unable to introduce into evidence any documentation to counter the testimony of the landlord that the apartment was perfectly fine and that he had just failed to pay the rent. It was difficult to watch someone with no legal training struggle to navigate in a system not designed for unrepresented litigants. And at the end of the trial, he had lost not only his home, but also his confidence that the courts were a place where you can obtain justice. The civil legal aid shortage, especially in light of recent funding cuts, is a pressing problem that demands immediate attention and innovativeness in finding solutions. Here in Wisconsin, we have been working towards some of these solutions. Some examples include the work of the State Bar. They have created a rural clerkship program to give law students the chance to work alongside rural judges and attorneys. The State Bar and the Law Foundation have partnered to provide a stipend to recruit attorneys to practice in rural Wisconsin, and this was made possible by a generous private donation. Our Supreme Court has expanded pro bono opportunities, allowing inactive and emeritus attorneys to volunteer and awarding continuing legal education credit to practicing attorneys for their pro bono service. We have allowed for more funding to be directed towards civil legal aid providers, and we convened an attorney retention and recruitment committee to examine ways to attract and retain attorneys in the communities that need them most. And the Wisconsin Access to Justice Commission, which I have been the liaison to for the past 7 years, continues to study these issues and promote solutions. They've mapped legal service deserts, examined the rise of debt collection and eviction cases, and pushed for reforms that make courts easier to navigate for people without lawyers. Even with very limited funding, they've created the Wisconsin Free Legal Answers website, an online service where individuals can ask legal questions. Volunteer attorneys can then log on to answer those questions and provide limited scope representation. Every month, this service facilitates attorneys and law students working under the supervision of attorneys in helping resolve over 150 legal questions that may have otherwise gone unanswered. Additionally, it provides a central location linking Wisconsinites to civil legal aid programs across the state, which may be able to provide additional legal help. This website, along with the bar associations, our law school clinical programs, our Supreme Court, all of us are assisting Wisconsin attorneys in fulfilling their oath to never reject, from any consideration personal to themselves, the cause of the defenseless and oppressed. We still have a lot of work to do to provide legal help to those in need, which is where all of you come in. I'm thrilled to see you all here today to learn more about the rural attorney shortage and consider how states across the country are successfully using different models to provide legal help for everyone, regardless of whether they live in an urban or rural community. It's about finding new ways to meet people where they are, geographically, economically, and culturally, and making sure our systems are ready to meet them halfway. When people have meaningful access to legal help, our entire justice system works better. Outcomes are fairer, decisions are better informed, cases move more efficiently, and people leave believing that the system is worthy of their trust. Access to justice strengthens not only the individuals we serve, but the very foundation of our democracy. Thank you all for being here and the commitment you bring to ensuring that justice truly reaches every corner of this country. Meaningful access to justice requires collaboration among lawyers, judges, advocates, and community partners alike. As Cesar Chavez, famous labor leader and civil rights activist, said, "Together, all things are possible." And as we say here in Wisconsin, forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Dallett, for that warm welcome. So though I've lived in Madison for over 20 years now, I grew up in Quincy, Illinois, a Mississippi River town on the western tip of Illinois, about 2 hours from St. Louis and 5.5 hours from Chicago. A few years ago, the local newspaper was sold to a corporation from a big city many states away. Concerned about the loss of local news, a few concerned citizens, including my parents, who are here today, hi Mom and Dad, yeah, launched an online newspaper, Muddy River News, tagline, "Our home, our news." Muddy River News has become the main source for Quincy and the surrounding area to get news about local elections, local government, local events, and of particular interest, local high school sports. I've seen the same creativity, spunk, and determination Muddy River News embodies with the Rural Justice Task Force. Over the past 4 years, I've had the privilege of listening to people across the country, from Alaska to Alabama, from Maine to Montana. What I've seen are people and communities not waiting for rescue, but solving problems. They're innovating every day, finding new ways to help their neighbors, to partner, to use technology, and to deliver justice and the basic needs and rights that depend on it. I've learned about solutions from community justice workers, to clinics at libraries and laundromats, to partnerships with schools and hospitals, to technological innovations that are transforming how people get legal help. Solutions that, by succeeding despite great logistical, technological, and resource challenges, have much to teach us about expanding access to justice everywhere. That's why this work matters far beyond the communities we call rural, because rural America's access to justice innovations are a blueprint for closing the justice gap nationwide. We sometimes hear the phrase, and likely will today, rural legal desert, often in reference to the lack of attorneys in many rural places. It's time to reclaim this phrase from one of scarcity to one of abundance. For deserts are anything but barren. They're vibrant, complex, and resilient. They're full of life that's adapted to thrive. And that's how I think of rural America, fertile with lessons for adapting and evolving the justice system so that it reaches everyone it is meant to serve. As we move through today's program, I invite you to hold on to that image of rural not as remote, but as resourceful, not as forgotten, but as foundational, because rural is home to the people, the partnerships, and the solutions that will help us finally realize the promise of justice for everywhere and everyone. And with that, now on to the main part of the program. We're going to engage in a myth-busting exercise, and we've talked about technological challenges in rural areas. Well, we've had one today. There was going to be a live poll, but there's an issue with that, so we're going to do old-fashioned hand raising. So are you ready for the first myth? Americans know when they need a lawyer and where to turn for help. Fact or myth? Myth? Okay. We don't even need to raise our hands. We can just scream it out. Okay, great. To talk us through this, we have Dr. Becky Sandifer, professor at Arizona State University. She's one of the nation's foremost researchers on access to justice, and I'll add, a graduate of Madison West High School and the University of Wisconsin. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
It's fun to be back. This is one of my favorite myths because it does so much work to support the status quo, which is what a good myth does if it's a good myth. But I just want to unpack two pieces of it. So think about the problems in your life that are legal, even if you're a lawyer, right? So they emerge in relationships with other people, like your neighbors and their annoying dog, or your kid, or your kid's teacher, or they emerge in relationships with like big distant things, bureaucracies, agencies, offices. And you care about them not because they're legal, but because they affect some part of your life that you care about. Normal people are just like you, right? They're not sitting around thinking, my problem getting insurance to pay for my kid's medicine is a justice issue. They're thinking, I need to get my kid's medicine. So shifting the way we think about people's experience of justice issues to the way they think about people's experience of justice issues is a really important move that lets us think about how to meet them where they are, which is one of the themes of this event. And it also starts to explain to us part of, but not all of why, if you look at what makes it to the justice system, so if you're sitting in your legal aid office or you're sitting in a court, you're overwhelmed by people you have to turn away because you can't help them, or you're overwhelmed by people who don't have attorneys to represent them in litigation and other kinds of court and hearing events. Those people are the tip of an iceberg. There may be 15%, there may be 20% of the people who have those justice issues that involve insurance and wages and having a place to live and caring for people who depend on you. So this myth does two important kinds of work that has made us design things improperly. Let's put it that way. That's a polite way to put it. So one important kind of work that it does is it makes us think that the way we think about the world, we who are providing legal solutions, is the way to think about the world. And so that blinds us from some things we know about how to connect with people effectively and accessibly. And Matthew Burnett and I sometimes call those the 4 T's, because that's easy to remember. So help is accessible and effective when it's timely, when it shows up where you are when you realize that you need it, when it's targeted to the specific thing that's actually happening to you, and framed in a way that makes sense given your experience of that thing. It's targeted to you. It's trustworthy. It comes from some person or object or entity or source that you believe means well by you. And one of the things we're learning about trustworthiness is it's not one size fits all. People have diverse experiences and diverse understandings of how the world works, and so we need to think about trustworthiness as a pretty richly textured thing. And then finally, it needs to be transparent. So people need to be able to understand, this is the kind of situation that I'm in, these are the choices that I have. If I choose door A, this might happen. If I choose door B, this might happen. The reason transparency matters is because once it's a legal issue and I start to tell you, oh, this is a demand letter, your state says you must file an answer within 11 days, I've given you legal advice. And so meaningful help requires us to give the authorization and capacity of frontline helpers to be able to do fundamental, central things that help people understand the issues that they face. So that's why that 4th T is so important. So we design services around lawyers and courts and legal aid offices, but not around those 4 principles that we know help things connect to people. The other work that this myth does is it makes us design those solutions for the 15 to 20% of problems that make it to the existing system, and not think about the enormous scale that we actually have to respond to. So if 15 or 20% of problems are making it to the existing system, and I think all of us can agree they're not necessarily handled well by that existing system, but they're at least touching that existing system, that means we need 400 or 500% more touches with something that connects to law and to justice and to rights. And so we have to completely, well, let's not say completely, we have to 180 the way that we think about how we might connect with people, and we have to be honest with ourselves about the enormous scope and scale of the connections that we need to be making. And then when we do that, people can access justice and have access to their own law.
Thank you, Becky, for setting the stage so powerfully. So our next myth explores what happens when people do know they need legal help but can't find it close to home. So no scanning. You guys didn't like the raising hands part, so we'll just scream it out. Here's the next myth. When Americans need legal help, there are enough resources within reach. Myth or truth? Myth? Okay, you caught on well. Okay, great. And we have 2 speakers joining us to explore this myth. First, we'll hear from Judge Michael Zell of the predominantly rural-serving Portage County Circuit Court in central Wisconsin. And then next, we'll hear from Beth Ann Richland, Executive Director of Judicare of Legal Aid here in Wisconsin. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much for inviting me here today. I'm Michael Zell. I'm a judge in Portage County, Wisconsin, as you've heard. We are a 3-judge county with 70,000 people. If you drew an X through the state of Wisconsin, Stevens Point is right at the intersection of those 2 lines. And so we are more properly really central Wisconsin than northern. But I will say that My first day of work, I was told in 2022, when I became a new judge, that I was being assigned 932 cases, not including the juveniles. And so there is plenty of legal work, plenty of legal problems in central and northern Wisconsin in need of lawyers. I also think it's important to tell you a little bit about my story as a lawyer, because I think it relates to the shortage of lawyer issue that we are all talking about here today. I started my career in Milwaukee, largely representing individuals who most needed legal help in family law and criminal defense and bankruptcy. But I heard this rumor in about 2005 that there was a shortage of lawyers in central and northern Wisconsin. And my wife, being from Almond, Wisconsin, in Portage County, we looked at the options and we moved to central Wisconsin, where I started my solo practice there again. And it was true. There was plenty of work. There were plenty of people who needed legal help. But ultimately, the cost of health insurance for my growing family of 5 drove me out. And I took a government job in central Wisconsin in about 2015, and I've worked in one capacity or another for the state of Wisconsin since then. These are some of the things that affect the decisions of lawyers and where they work and what they do. And I think it's important to understand that that might be what many of the lawyers in Wisconsin are grappling with. I am happy, I am grateful that I found a way again to help individuals as a judge. There are many people that come in before the court, and judges have a great capacity to work to try to balance those scales of justice that we always talk about. That being said, there are these inconvenient guardrails called the law, and so we do have to enforce the law, and frequently, or maybe occasionally is a better word, we have to interpret the law. But a circuit court judge is largely responsible for enforcing the law. And so, I think there are a couple stories here, just like Judge Dellett told you about her most memorable case. There are often hearings in front of a circuit court judge that bring out the same kind of feelings. And so 2 most recent stories for me are these. And I'd ask you first to imagine being an 85-year-old woman or having an 85-year-old woman in court in front of you who's being sued over a debt that was incurred over 7 years ago. She signed up for a debt consolidation service because she saw something on TV about it. She went to the website and filled out some basic details and didn't really know what she was getting, which was obvious because what she was applying for was a loan. And now the person who owns the loan, who is, I think, the third buyer of the loan along the chain, is in court. The lawyer there for the company is suing her and wants a judgment for $11,000 based on late fees and interest. She gets $1,200 a month in Social Security benefits. She tells you that her rent is being increased this month from $875 a month to $950. She has no assets. Her landlord is not very sympathetic to her plight. She is appearing in court by herself because she has no access to a lawyer. The lawyer for the plaintiff first asked for a default judgment at the first hearing because they filed a complaint and she never filed a written answer, which is a requirement in Wisconsin. But she did file a handwritten letter asking the judge to do certain things, and which the judge construed as an answer. And so I denied the request for a default judgment. But the lawyer then asked for summary judgment at the next hearing because he had sent her interrogatories, another procedural device in Wisconsin where you can ask discovery questions. And she never answered, and in Wisconsin, the law says that those interrogatories are then deemed answered in the way contrary to her interest. And so these are the guardrails I'm talking about. The law is very clear on some of these things, and a self-represented individual in a large civil claim has a very hard time following the parameters of the law without assistance. When I look at her and others like her in the courtroom, I see nothing but despair and hopelessness at the lack of understanding the legal system. A similar story to that, one with which Judge Dalit brought up, or an example of the domestic violence victim whose abuser is a classic abusive husband. She's a stay-at-home wife. She and I saw each other in court for the first time when she was applying for a restraining order. She'd been staying at the local shelter sponsored by CAP Services. This is a person who has been threatened for years. The abuser was threatening her and her children. Every time she would leave, he would track her. He would threaten to harm the children if she didn't come back. And finally, she got the courage to leave and go to the shelter. The shelter has the resources to assist people with preparing paperwork for a restraining order and injunction. And she filed it and then showed up to the court to find another kind of abuse, I suppose, which is that her husband, who has the paycheck and the money, is sitting there with a lawyer who understands the legal system, the rules of evidence, which do apply at an injunction hearing in Wisconsin, and the poor plaintiff in the restraining order case did not. She does not know the rules of evidence. People frequently show up in these situations with police reports or a friend who heard something or other things like that, but without a witness or other evidence that complies with the rules of evidence, that person is not likely to be successful in court. When I see her and others like her in court, there is only a combination of terror and hopelessness at the inability to manage the legal system themselves. I have seen around us in Portage County the dwindling pool of lawyers as the baby boomers have retired and there's a lack of anyone else coming in to fill the gap. What does this mean for our system? You know, we as judges perceive our role to be trying to balance the scales of justice in the courtroom so that all voices have an opportunity to be heard. And if we can't, and by we I mean humanity, the legal system, all of you, me, the judges, the lawyers, if we can't find a way that everyone in the legal system gets to have their voice heard, then I don't know what we're doing. I hope that there is some hope in all of this, and by coming here today, I believe there is. I really am amazed, I'm humbled and in awe at all the people who participated in this process and created this task force and created this report, which we've had a chance to review and think about here today. That is a reason for hope. The next speaker you'll hear from is Beth Ann Richland. She's the Executive Director of Judicare. She has created some excellent programs that she's providing to us in Portage County. One of those is called FLIC, the Family Law Information Center, which comes to Portage County once or twice a month, and then does it virtually also a couple times a month, listening to people's questions about family law and trying to answer those and help them fill out their forms so that they can appear in court without a lawyer. Another great program that they've started in Portage County is a small claims mediation program. And that program intervenes in the small claims system. They provide personnel every other Tuesday when we have our small claims court. And those personnel, the judge directs people to speak to the mediator. It is not a mandatory program, but people are encouraged and directed to at least speak to the mediators. And then we have had incredible success. Many eviction actions have been dismissed by stipulation or agreement of the parties rather than proceeding to an eviction. And many of you probably know that an eviction on your CCAP or court system record makes it very difficult to get in another apartment. So that's a really great benefit for the people of Portage County. And many of our simply money judgment or debt collection actions are also resolved by stipulation. That program has been remarkably successful in Portage County. And so I think those are the things that I see in my work in this area that have given me hope and a passion to keep the work alive. And so thank you for being here. Thank you for coming to Wisconsin. We are happy to have you here.
Good afternoon. I'm Beth Ann Richland. I've been introduced a few times now. I'm the Executive Director of Judicare Legal Aid, and we are one of 2 LSC grantees in the state of Wisconsin. And we are tasked with providing equal access to justice, high-quality civil legal aid in the northern 33 counties of the state of Wisconsin, which is very rural. There are a lot of trees. It is very beautiful. It has 4 seasons. I affectionately call it the Colorado of the Midwest. I've heard that made it into the report. I didn't see it, but it is a tagline I have used to recruit people to come and work at Judicare Legal Aid. As you can imagine, not as attractive without many large cities and serving a very rural population. In addition, we do amazing work serving Native Americans statewide. We appear in all 11 tribal courts, the 33 circuit courts, 2 federal courts, administrative courts. As you can imagine, this is a bit of a lift for a law firm to be doing work across that large geographical area. And so we love to innovate and take chances. And so we are a great supporter of the Rural Justice Task Force and the work that has been done to try to outline some of those best practices and do some exciting new things. We love it. We have already know that high levels of poverty can be a major obstacle in obtaining justice, resolving your legal issue. So I'm going to tell you just a brief story about somebody who, as Becky pointed out, he figured out he had a legal issue. He knew that there could be a possible solution. So he already made it past step 1. He identified he had a legal issue. Step 2, he found us. So he found a civil legal aid lawyer. He made it through. That should be like step 2 through 10, because he had to go through intake, and then he had to be deemed a priority. And he made it through, and his case landed on my desk when I was not really practicing much anymore, when an attorney left our firm. And the case landed on my desk in 2020, and I call up Jack, and Jack is being evicted from subsidized housing in a rural community, and the courthouse is about 60 miles away. And Jack is wheelchair bound. And I said, Jack, how do you usually get to places? And he says, well, I can get Medicaid transportation. I can sometimes call a taxi. I have a friend that can sometimes take me places. And I say, all right, Jack, because we're going to need everybody in order to resolve this issue. We're going to have all these people on deck to do this. And he says, okay, Attorney Beth Ann, I believe in you. We're going to do this. Our first hearing, we drive all the way to the courthouse. Of course, they are late because they are in a transit van, and there's traffic. It's a small town, but there's traffic, trust me. And, getting up the elevator and, into the courtroom, we're a little bit late. I told the judge, or the court commissioner, actually, my client is coming, they're going to be here. We show up for, in Wisconsin, what is a 5-minute return date in a small claims action, like literally 5 minutes. I had previously asked if this could be done by phone. I had volunteered to do it by Zoom. Nope, couldn't do that. The opposing party, however, was on video, even though they were located in the city in which the courthouse was located, the attorney for the opposing party. So, there's a little disparity there. We're going to move past it. We got here. I'm able to meet with my client in person for the first time, right? Because I am also very far away from this gentleman. Jack had what turned out to be an extraordinary good case. I was very happy to take it on, and he was a fantastic client. But resources were very limited. Every time we needed to do something, became the social worker, trying to arrange for all of the services to be in place so that Jack could participate fully in the court proceeding. And things snowballed. We did a second appearance, there were issues of fact, the judge sent us to mediation. Could the mediation be done by Zoom? Yes, the mediation can be done by Zoom, but you and your client must be in the same place. Okay, I can drive to Jack's house. Jack does not have access to the internet, nor is there quality broadband available in Jack's neighborhood, which was a very rural area, just again. So again, we have to overcome these barriers in order to even meaningfully participate in this other way. So Jack and I won, okay? Long story short, Jack and I. We did a great job. We were able to save his housing subsidy. He is still stably housed to this day. How do I know this? Because Jack still writes to me. It is a very wonderful perk of being a civil legal aid attorney when you can be there for somebody in need. But the issues of Jack's case are definitely not unique to the cases that we see every day at Judicare Legal Aid. There are Jacks calling every day, and those cases take away time and resources from others who continue to call, and the snowball effects that continue to happen. Last week at Judicare Legal Aid, I ran a report in our online intake system. We rejected 52 people who had already overcome that barrier that Professor Sandiford talked about. They already knew they had a legal problem. They reached out to us, 52 people, and we said, we don't have the resources to help you, even though you have identified that you have a legal problem, and we have identified that we may have some advice or brief service to give to you, or some extended service. We just don't have the capacity to serve you. And that's the reality in my service area. That's the reality in many rural areas, as I learned as a member of the Rural Justice Task Force across the United States, that in my community, where I'm working every day to help as many folks as possible, I can continue to help, but in order for me to be able to reach those other 52 people a week, we need to find better solutions and more solutions. And as Rebecca pointed out, that is only a small percentage of the people who even need those solutions. So I'm setting the bar real low. We're just even trying to meet a greater need. And we have really high hopes in the state of Wisconsin that the recommendations in this report and some of the activity that will happen after its release will result in some great solutions for our state. And I thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Judge Zell and Beth Ann, for sharing your perspective and insight on the complexity of access in rural communities. You guys ready to yell out again? Do you think it's going to be myth or fact? Okay. Oh, you haven't learned. Our next myth looks at community capacity, the belief that rural areas simply lack the resources to close the justice gap. So here's the prompt, you guys, get ready. Rural America has a dearth of resources to close the justice gap. Fact or myth? Myth. To help us understand this question of resources, we have Holly Clendenin of Southwest Wisconsin Technical College. As Chief Student Services Officer, Holly oversees a comprehensive suite of student services, which includes a partnership with Law for Learners to connect students with free legal help. Southwest Wisconsin Technical College won the 2025 Aspen Institute Prize for Community College Excellence, the nation's premier award for two-year colleges, in large part due to the programs Holly oversees. Please join me and welcome Holly to the stage.
Good afternoon, I'm Holly and I work at Southwest Tech in Fenimore, Wisconsin. And to tell you about how rural we are, we do have electrical car charging stations on campus, and then further down the parking lot, we have horse and buggy pole tie-ups for our Amish community that visit our campus. We serve about 7,000 students annually. Some of our biggest programs are in agriculture, manufacturing, and healthcare. Our district, we serve the 5 counties in the southwest corner of the state, also very beautiful, but I've not called it the Colorado of Wisconsin before. The population's about 120,000 people in those 5 counties. To give you a little bit about background on our student population, about 50% of our program students are eligible for federal Pell Grants based on their income. Our average student age is 26, so although we have a lot of students coming to us directly from high school, we also have a lot of adult students who either are reskilling themselves with a new degree or never went to college and are coming back to get a degree or credential to help increase their earning potential. In my position in student services, we are really focused on helping our students be successful in all the things that happen outside of the classroom, because we have found many of our students who don't get to that graduation stage, it's not because of the classwork, it's because of the things that happen to them when they are a student that happen outside of the classroom. And I was very honored to work on the Rural Justice Task Force. Shortly after, Southwest Tech partnered with Law for Learners in 2021 to be able to provide free legal services to our students. Through Law for Learners, students and staff can access free legal assistance. And I often hear people say that rural communities don't have the resources that many people need to navigate problems like housing, employment, or family issues. But that's not the full picture. I did find that the Wisconsin Bar has shared that the number of attorneys in the rural parts of the state has decreased by 7% over the last 4 years, but that doesn't mean the resources aren't there if local leadership is willing to work collaboratively and creatively. At Southwest Tech and at our institutions across the state, we have students who are incredibly resourceful and driven to reach their goals and improve their lives. At Southwest Tech, our students who connect with Law for Learners are primarily referred to the service by staff who we've made aware of Law for Learners and through our school communications, which are as simple as e-newsletters and monitors, TV screens we have in our hallways, letting students know about upcoming events. The primary issues that we know our students are contacting Law for Learners are about are family issues, which we've heard about, immigration, finances, name and gender marker changes, criminal records as they're navigating their new careers. They may have some things they need to work through, and housing is a very big one. When students face these challenges that threaten their education, they show up. And through Law for Learners, our students can meet with volunteer legal aids and attorneys, and very importantly, they can most often meet with these people virtually because transportation can be a huge issue for our students. There's no public transportation in Southwest Wisconsin. There's no public transportation that's going to help a student in Fenimore get to, don't worry about that, get to Madison if they don't have a car or their car is broken down or their car is impounded because they got a traffic ticket and can't afford to get it out. So that ability to help our students connect virtually has been a huge benefit to our students. Recently, we had a student who was navigating a housing dispute that was potentially going to cause her to have to drop out of college, but because of the help she received with Law for Learners, she was able to work through that housing issue, stay enrolled, and she is on track to graduate, which is our goal for all of our students who begin their program at Southwest Tech. So what I've learned through my time with Law for Learners is that rural communities don't suffer from a lack of resources or commitment. They suffer from distance and disconnection. People care deeply, but services are often fragmented or too far away. And when we bring legal aid into the trusted, familiar spaces like a college and a group, a faculty member, an advisor who knows that student, people are much more likely to seek help early before a small problem becomes a big problem that can disrupt their education or disrupt their life. So rural Wisconsin is full of hardworking, determined students who just need a fair chance to succeed. Some of them just simply need a person who's willing to listen and willing to help. And programs like Law for Learners remind us that access to justice isn't only about geography, it's about meeting people where they are, where life happens, and where services that strengthen both individuals and communities can have a big impact. Rural doesn't mean lacking, it means inventive and capable. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly, for showing us how local institutions like technical colleges can make a difference. I just have to say, somebody met Holly and also had heard that the community college had won this Aspen Prize, which is this huge national honor and award. And they said when they met Holly, they said she's why they won that award. So you can see why. Our fourth myth tackles a familiar question: who can actually help? There's a persistent belief that only lawyers can close the justice gap. You guys ready to state your opinion? Okay. Is that a myth or a fact? You got it. Okay. Here to help us challenge this idea that only lawyers can fill the justice gap is Nicole Nelson, CEO of Frontline Justice, which is working to mobilize, support, and equip trusted community advocates to become frontline legal helpers. Please join me in welcoming Nicole to the stage.
Good afternoon. So, what do we miss when we include only lawyer voices in designing the legal system? This is a question I posed to Liz Medicine Crow, a colleague of mine and the president of First Alaskans Institute a few years ago. And her answer was quick, and it was unexpected, and it absolutely floored me. And I'm going to get to that in a second. But first, I want to give you a little bit of context about me, my community, and why we were even having this conversation in the first place. So, as Rebecca mentioned, I am the CEO of Frontline Justice, which is dedicated to bridging the nation's justice gap by empowering a new category of legal helper, the justice worker, across the nation. And I was brought on to lead this charge after spending 25 years in the field in Alaska as a staff attorney, a supervising attorney, and a longtime executive director of our only legal aid program. And my home, Alaska, which I'm very proud of, is huge. It's bigger than the next 3 states combined. That's Texas, Alaska, and Montana. It has a very small population, less than 750,000 of us. Justice Bolger and I are both here, so the population has decreased. And most of it is extremely rural. So half of the population lives in Anchorage and the surrounding area, which is where I live. And the balance of the population is spread across very remote and distant villages that can range from 30 people to maybe 1,000 is a big one. And they're mostly off the road system, which means to get into these areas, you need to fly in maybe a small plane or a snow machine, or you can go by water to some communities if the seasons are right. And it is richly diverse. It's proudly home to 229 tribal nations. There are 100 different languages that are spoken in the school district that my daughter went to school. And it's a place of just extremes: beauty, distance, geography, and weather. But the infrastructure is kind of thin. And sometimes justice can be hard to come by. And like every other legal aid organization that I know of, we were turning away one person, one of our neighbors, for everyone that we were able to serve. And again, as Becky says, and everybody else agrees with, we also know that there were so many people that weren't even coming to our doors. We, like you all, are drinking from a fire hose. And one solution, the one that's most often offered in this in response to the justice crisis, is more lawyers. And I 100% agree that the fact that there are too few lawyers in a system that is built for lawyers is certainly a problem. But sticking to lawyer-only solutions, to my mind, is a bit like saying the solution to the water gushing in your face is to open your mouth wider. It's just not viable. We need to divert the flow. And so we've got a scalability problem. But aside from the scalability problem, I also think that we have another foundational problem. And this brings me back to Liz's answer to my question. What do we miss when we center lawyers instead of those most impacted in the legal system? And she said quite simply, we miss justice itself. We aren't slightly off target. We have completely missed the boat in the entire point of the exercise. And when you look at the evidence, I think she's right. So with this in mind, our community came together under the leadership of our Supreme Court, committed to the idea that addressing our community's access to justice crisis required us to move beyond lawyer-only solutions. And we began to imagine systems anew. We started by trying to understand our ecosystem. We wanted to understand where the lawyers were. No surprise, they were along the road system. But also not only where the lawyers weren't, but what resources our communities had, what they could add to the soup, and how we could build something together that can meet needs. And this in turn led us to seek out a medical legal partnership, because we learned that the tribally operated healthcare system had the biggest footprint within our state. Down to that small village, there was a community health center or health aid in every village. And so we thought, well, maybe we can, join forces and see if we could solve this problem. And this turned out to be transformative, because we learned that the healthcare system was 40 years ahead of us in thinking about how to address these very same issues of scale. They have built out a full range of different healthcare providers, all trained to perform various procedures. And so we decided that we would try to build out the justice analog of the community health aid program. We developed targeted training programs that were specific to problems our communities were facing. They were low-hanging legal fruit, where simple legal problems had been left unaddressed but had escalated into big problems for the communities. And the model is showing really great promise. Alaska Legal Services has trained and supported hundreds of community justice workers. They're in 42 different communities, most of which are off the road system. And we have just learned, thanks to the research of Becky and Matthew, that they drew down $23 million in SNAP benefits that otherwise would not have been distributed. So have you ever been helped by a community health aide? Have you seen another first responder, like a paramedic or an EMT, in action? Can you imagine our healthcare system without them? Community justice workers aim to be the justice equivalent of these crucial actors in the healthcare system. They're ordinary people in a wide variety of trusted roles within their community who are trained and supported to provide simple legal help on issues that otherwise go unmet. They're oftentimes the people that people turn to with their life problems. And the fact that they are drawn from the communities that they're serving oftentimes means they're closest to the problems and they are trusted by those who are seeking help. And this idea is catching fire across the lower 48. There are 11 jurisdictions that have authorized or are in the process of authorizing justice worker programs, and 20 more in the wings. And recently, our friends at the American Bar Association and the National Conference of State Supreme Court Justices passed resolutions encouraging jurisdictions to look into these type of programs. And I know, some of you may worry. What happens if it goes wrong? Our clients' lives are hard enough. We don't want to create a two-tiered system of justice with those with more resources get something better than the rest. And I hear you. Our clients deserve only the best. But I believe this is better justice. This is the gold standard. Everyone in our country should have access to right-size, on-demand, effective legal help from a trusted source right when they need it. And I'm not afraid to try something new, because the weight of this injustice is crushing us all. And can you imagine if it worked? Can you imagine if everyone was empowered to know and use the law? I can. I dream of a day when justice not only flows like a river, but it permeates the atmosphere like the air that we breathe, universally and equally available to everyone. And I believe the only way we're going to get there is to include all those who are closest to the problems in the solution. So I invite you to come with me into that future. Will you join me?
Wow, these speakers are amazing, aren't they? Yeah. I'm just going to go off script for a minute and just say I feel so blessed to be part of this conversation and in this room with all of you, the speakers, but everyone sitting here. Yes, so thank you, everybody. And thank you, Nicole. We have one final myth to tackle, and it's a big one. You guys ready to get out your loud voices again? Okay. Are the organized bar and judiciary opposed to new models that can expand who can help in closing the justice gap? Okay, yell out. Myth. To help us unpack this, we couldn't have just one or two voices, we needed a whole panel of experts. To introduce and moderate our panel, please join me in welcoming to the stage a fellow Rural Justice Task Force member, a retired partner at Quarles and Brady, Fred Gantz.
Can everyone hear me okay? They used to tease me in my office that they weren't sure when there was long distance telephones whether I really needed a phone for the Madison area. Just about reach anywhere.
We've got some online folks. You may need a microphone.
Oh, okay, that's right. Yeah. Yep.
All right, shall we?
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Rebecca, for emceeing today. We just heard Nicole speak about new categories of legal helpers that are changing what access to justice looks like at the community level. Now, to debunk the final myth of that story, we'll shift to the policy side, to the courts and bar leaders who are enacting changes to make structural changes possible. This conversation will challenge the idea that the legal profession and judiciary strongly oppose the idea of non-lawyers providing civil legal services. In fact, we're joined by three esteemed leaders who have lent their energy and national influence to broadening who can help solve legal problems. As a member of LSC's Rural Justice Task Force, an active legal aid pro bono volunteer, I hope that all of you in the physical and virtual audience also will agree that creative solutions can be done pragmatically, ethically, and with great benefit to underserved communities, in particular rural ones, where I practiced a great amount of my life. You know, people talk about traveling to such places as Miami and Los Angeles. I was a little more attuned to Neillsville, Platteville, and Wausau, the Colorado of Wisconsin. So we're fortunate to have with us Michelle Benke, President of the American Bar Association. the world's largest voluntary association of lawyers, judges, and other legal professionals. Michelle, like me, has the good judgment to call Madison home, where she is a member of Boardman Clark's business, real estate, and estate planning practice groups, and that has been an outstanding firm, long committed to legal aid in our community. The Honorable Joel Bolger, Senior Justice of the Alaska Courts System and a member of LSC's Rural Justice Task Force, is with me to my immediate right and your immediate left. Born in Iowa, Justice Bolger came to Alaska as a VISTA volunteer for Alaska Legal Services Corporation in 1978. For 30 years, he engaged in public and private practice and served as a trial judge in the rural Alaskan towns of Dillingham, Utqiagvuk, Valdez, and Kodiak. And I had the privilege to visit Valdez this summer, just for a short period before I loaded a cruise ship. Texas Supreme Court Justice Brett Busby is a seventh-generation Texan, third-generation Eagle Scout, and lifelong violinist who grew up in Amarillo and Austin. Justice Busby was appointed to the Supreme Court in 2019 and serves as the court's liaison to the Texas Access to Justice Commission. He also serves on Frontline Justice's National Leadership Council. As we begin our discussion, I'd like to share something that Justice Busby said in fall 2024 as the Supreme Court of Texas prepared to issue proposed rules allowing legal professionals and court access assistants to provide limited legal services for low-income individuals. It is unacceptable that 92% of low-income Texans are not being served by our legal profession. Their basic civil legal needs are real and serious. They include protection from domestic violence, denial of veterans' benefits, and access to housing and food. We must explore innovative structural changes like those in today's order if we are to close this gap and ensure that justice is not simply a privilege for those who can afford it, but a right guaranteed to all. So let's start with a broad view. Each of you represents a state or an institution that has taken real steps to expand who can deliver civil legal assistance. So Justice Busby, I'm going to start with you. What shifted, either in mindset or circumstances, that made your institution say yes to, or at least explore piloting these changes, particularly for rural and low-income communities?
Sure. Well, thanks, Fred, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a privilege to be here and be part of this discussion. This is a personal issue for me. My dad is a rural lawyer in a small Texas community and confronts these issues on a regular basis, and we see them all the time in our court system. And I think, as Fred mentioned, we have proposed rules that have been out for comment on licensing, not only our version of community justice workers, which we call court access assistants, but also legal paraprofessionals to do limited legal practice. And so the process that led to the order that Fred was describing, there were really several different pieces that sort of came together, I think, to galvanize people behind action here. One was just the statistics. 92% of low-income Texans and Americans not having access to basic civil legal services, I think, is just unacceptable. And I think when most legal professionals, when most people in the community who are concerned about their community hear that, they're really astonished and dismayed by that. We, of course, along with that, Texas has huge rural legal deserts, as a lot of states do. We have 254 counties, and there are some that have, you need at least 3 lawyers in a county to have a lawsuit. And a lot of our counties don't have that many, so unfortunately. And I think one thing that really helped people understand this is that it's really a basic economic problem of supply and demand. Anytime you limit the supply of a service, you're going to have unmet demand, and the cost of the service is going to go up. right? That's what they teach us in basic economics classes. And when you start to think about the problem that way, you realize that, as Nicole said, it's a problem of supply. And how can you increase the supply of available legal services? And so from there, you realize that, well, who's responsible for making decisions in this area? And it's state Supreme Courts and state legislators that are the regulators of the legal profession, and that have the capacity to do something about it. And then the final thing, I was a pro bono volunteer when I was in private practice, did a lot of legal work for free. Can't do that anymore as a judge, but am honored to be able to help in other ways. And have worked with our Legal Services Corporation grantees. In Texas, we have tremendous grantees. I've gone up several times to lobby members of Congress to talk to them about the help that Legal Services Corporation funds give to people in their communities. And it's so essential what LSC does and what our pro bono lawyers do. And even with that, there's this huge unmet need. So what do we do in addition to that? That's all very important, and we need to continue doing that and growing it. But that alone is not going to solve the problem. The grants to LSC and all the other institutions that fund civil legal services provision, and the lawyers who are stepping up to provide services for free. The need is just too great. And so when you bring all of those factors together, I think that's really what led our court and our bar to look at, what sort of innovative changes can we make here to meet the rest of the need.
Any reactions from, I've got other questions for our other panelists, but any immediate reactions?
No,
Go ahead.
I think the justice is right. It is a supply question. And I think it's also an issue of, to a certain extent, where the pieces are on the chessboard. Within the ABA, we see younger lawyers coming out. They have a significant amount of debt. I have two adult children in their 30s, so this is not a blasphemy against young people, but they want to be in vibrant communities, they want to have access to social lives, and so it does become difficult to get them to go where there might not be two other lawyers. So that issue of kind of the supply and demand, and none of us are going to mandate that they go some particular place. We can try and entice them, as the State Bar of Wisconsin is, but I do think it is a supply question.
And I know, Justice Busby, when we had talked earlier, you had pointed out that Texas is a large state, but it has rural areas where there are not law schools. So,
yeah,
it's a struggle, and it's not just the smaller rural states. Justice Bolger, I want to get the Alaska perspective, especially having been to Alaska this past summer. Alaska's geography presents extraordinary access to justice challenges. From your perspective, how can the judiciary view non-lawyer helpers as essential partners in serving these vast regions?
Well, Fred, as Nicole told us just a few minutes ago, in Alaska, the access problems are very difficult. Most of the communities in the state do not have access to the road system at all. And also,
I didn't get to those areas.
and it's not just parts of Alaska that don't have a law school. We don't have a law school at all. Mm-hmm. So it's been natural throughout the history of the state to look for non-lawyer professionals in the communities that we want to serve to provide these services. In the 60s, just after statehood, the court system had a system of non-lawyer magistrates who provided the daily routine services, sometimes just over the kitchen table. And in the 70s, Alaska Legal Services began to have remote paralegal offices that provided legal services. It was just natural, about the same time that this task force began, that the Supreme Court passed a rule that allowed legal professionals to practice under the training and supervision of Alaska Legal Services Corporation. Now we have 42 locations across the state, and that's a beginning to try to solve this justice gap.
Michelle, I want to, and thank you, Justice, really appreciate that. Michelle, I want to talk about ABA's national perspective. As ABA president, you've seen states experimenting with new roles and pilot programs. How is the ABA supporting or partnering with those efforts? How might the ABA's national reach and influence help ensure quality, ethics, and consistency as states experiment with new models?
Well, the ABA has been a long-time supporter of equal justice and access to justice. Almost every state has some statement that lawyers have an obligation, whether it's mandatory or aspirational, to provide pro bono services. We go and advocate. I want to make sure you come with us when we do ABA Day so we can advocate for LSC funding. So we have that long history. But a phrase that we're using more often these days is change is like heaven. Everybody wants to go there. They just don't want to go there right now. Having the discussion about how we can solve that gap is one that we are having within the ABA. And we have a great opportunity, a great capacity for convening. And so as we have seen some of the folks that are serving on these task force, and they have proposed these things, like any good group of lawyers, we push and pull and debate and discuss and debate and discuss and debate and discuss. But ultimately,
Lawyers do that, huh?
We do. We do. It's one of our core competencies. But we did pass the resolution recognizing that using community justice workers would be a key part of solving this issue.
And that's a perfect lead-in to something that I wanted to ask Justice Bolger and or Justice Busby, because when we were preparing for this session, Justice Bolger used the expression community justice workers that you just referred to. And I love that expression, So with that, I'll ask Justice Bolger and what approaches were most effective in building buy-in among your judicial colleagues?
Well, I think on this issue, Fred, it's important to choose approaches that do not threaten the bar or the court system. For example, approaches that focus on professionals that are supervised by a legal aid organization, approaches that involve just legal aid work. In Alaska, workers do food stamp applications, Indian Child Welfare Act cases, debt defense, domestic violence. There's no competition with practicing attorneys in those areas. And so these positions can be filled by volunteers and nonprofit employees in the communities that they served, but still under the supervision of the legal aid organization. I think that's a great first step.
Well, and one of the things that you pointed out, again, when we were preparing, is that this sometimes creates an alternative or flip side to this, is it sometimes creates an opportunity for lawyers to hire many paraprofessionals, several paraprofessionals within their office, and be able to provide legal services to individuals that they wouldn't ordinarily be able to provide. In other words, it provides an opportunity to expand their practices because these individuals are not being served by higher priced lawyers and they have problems such as debt issues and some of the other issues that we've talked about, including in the tribal areas, sometimes there are significant estate planning issues in terms of inheriting property and so forth. So it provides an avenue for expansion. I thought about this when we were talking about it. For many years, there was a lawyer in Fond du Lac whose name I forget, but he had an office where he was the only lawyer, and he had 4 paralegals working with him, and had a quite extensive legal practice for many years. Justice Busby.
Yeah, I think the point that you just made, Fred, is really, I think, a key towards getting buy-in from other judges for this type of system, and that is that a lot of our constituents, the folks who pay the money to run the court system, the folks who elect us, we have an all-elected judiciary, so the people who elect me are not getting legal services. And that should be, we should be responsive to the needs of our constituents. And it's because, for financial and other reasons, the market has not developed in that area, and also due to the limitation of the providers, the markets have not developed to be able to provide the kinds of legal services that you just mentioned. So I think judges realizing that the members of their community are not being well served by the current structure is part of it. Also, realizing that the courts this differs a little bit state to state, but at least in Texas, for us, the court has a constitutional responsibility to regulate the profession. And so that this really is on us in large part to convene people and figure out how are we going to solve this problem. And then also, I think one of the things that in talking with my colleagues around the state that they really appreciate, because they see this all the time, they have so many people coming into a system that's not designed, as was said earlier, not designed for people with lawyers, but without representation, but it's an adversary system. And so we as judges are not allowed to give people legal advice, and it can be very frustrating and heartbreaking at times to have people come in who have a clear need, and we're not allowed to tell them what to do under the current configuration in a lot of our courts. That's why some of the types of initiatives that were talked about earlier about how might we change the structure of some of these proceedings are very interesting in part for solving this problem. But, I think judges, and often because we can't help people, the cases take a long time and there have to be a lot of resets. This point was made earlier too, and so it takes a long time for the cases to get resolved, and the courts end up with huge dockets, and it's a problem just for getting their business done.
We need all the help we can get.
Absolutely.
And Justice Busby, you'd made a point earlier when we were preparing that I love, that I know Justice Dallett will relate to very well. Texas, like Wisconsin, as I understand it, roughly about half of our states in the nation elect our judges.
Right.
And you said you were elected to represent all Texans, not just lawyers.
Right.
I thought that was fantastic. We'll move on to our next question, having to do with building buy-in and mitigating opposition. And to some degree, we may have answered this already, but I'll ask it to Justice Busby one more time. Many states are navigating questions about how to expand who can help while maintaining quality and accountability. From your experience, what concerns have surfaced in these conversations, and what safeguards or partnerships have proven most effective in addressing them?
So I think in part, as Justice Bolger said earlier, there are, President Banky mentioned this as well, and with the resistance to change, and sometimes there's a lot of discussion and debate, which is very healthy. But I think as a profession, we're somewhat resistant to change and appreciate the way that things have been done. But we can see that it's not working. But there is some resistance to change. There's some resistance to competition. But I think, as Justice Bolger pointed out, the target of a lot of these efforts is areas where people are not being served currently. So you're not displacing current practices. Although we have had some concerns from solos and from rural practice saying, this is an area, whether it's landlord-tenant or consumer debt or probate, family law, those are the cases where we see the most unrepresented people. And there are people who have figured out a way to make an economically viable practice in those areas, and thank goodness that there are. But there are so many people out there who need those services that one of the things that we've trying to explain through this effort is that it's not really competing with those folks. We're just trying to provide enough services in those areas. And the steps that we took to do that really involved our Access to Justice Commission being a convener and bringing in judges and lawyers, Legal Services Corporation, grantees, lawyers from those programs in the state, to bring ideas, and also having wonderful speakers, including some of those in this room, and we're so grateful that they came to speak with us about experiences in other states, and really getting some data on how are these programs working in other states. Arizona has been such a leader on this, and I think that helped a lot of people see that this can work. There were concerns about quality, for example. What's the quality of the service that's going to be provided? And when you just have to look at the data in Arizona, and I'll get to that a little more in a second, but the other thing that we did was bring in lawyers from the affected practice areas where we see the most unrepresented people and said, we want to work with you on this. What do you consider a paraprofessional or community justice worker competent to do if they can pass an exam in the case of a paraprofessional, or they're being trained or supervised by a lawyer in the case of a community justice worker? What would you consider, you're the expert in family law, what would you consider them competent to do? You work with paralegals all the time. If they can pass an exam, and so we got a list, and that's where we started and said, okay, well, we want to work with the bar on this, and they're the ones that know very most how, what the simple kinds of legal tasks are that these additional categories of providers would be most helpful with. So that was some of the steps that we took, and I think the safeguards that we put in place to help address some of the concerns were either testing in the case of paraprofessionals. To be able to get a limited license, you'll have to pass an exam and have some training for that. Also, supervision in the case of our court access assistants, which are our community justice worker model, and then having a robust grievance process. But again, I think Arizona has seen that you almost never have to use it, and people have been extraordinarily satisfied with the work. Lawyers have gone and checked the work and said, this is first-class work. There have been very few complaints, and so it's working well on the ground.
And could you just briefly summarize what in fact, you've talked about Arizona being a leader here. What, in fact, did Arizona do? I'm not sure that I totally followed that.
Yeah, they've done a lot of different things.
Okay.
In addition to what we're talking about here today, they've changed the way that the legal profession can be financed as well. And so that's another whole separate topic of conversation that we could spend a lot of time on. And you've probably heard some of that in the news recently with some accounting firms and others entering the legal sector in Arizona. But they also have a very robust paraprofessional licensing program in Arizona, and we learned a lot about that through this process.
And we're not going to talk too much about those accounting firms or that, because that's kind of another area outside of our scope today.
Yeah.
Michelle, how did you bring skeptical members and ABA leadership along in the process?
Well, first, I'd have to say I didn't do it by myself. Really, the ABA process, our House of Delegates is our policy body. It's almost 600 lawyers, and that means there are 700 opinions. But that process really does unearth the issues and the questions, and much like we've done today here, it gives us an opportunity to do some of that myth-busting and to really dig deep. One of the presenters earlier talked about, and it's one of the things that probably took a good amount of the focus, you want to provide assistance, you want to close the gap, but we are generally talking about groups of people who either don't have a voice, don't have resources, and so you don't want to give them, it's not just even two-tier system, you want to make sure that there is not harm that will befall them. Because if they weren't able to access the system and get their issues resolved in the first instance, they are not going to be able to access a system for redress. And so thinking about what the parameters ought to be, thinking about whether it's licensure, whether it's supervision, those are all of the kinds of things that we discussed and debated. And I think what you saw in our resolution, which is another really important point, is there's not one size that fits all. What works in Alaska may not work in Wisconsin, or what works in Arizona may be able to be duplicated. So recognizing that the goal of providing that greater expansion of access is the goal. How you do it in your particular community may have to be tailored to your specific community. And then outlining some of those things when you're applying your solution that you should be thinking about to make sure that you're not doing any harm. And so that's really how our resolution came. We didn't come with one solution and we said, this is the only way in which community justice workers could be employed. We really acknowledged that there were these differences and all of them could be parts of the solution wherever you might be.
Yeah, and if you take a look at the report, you're really going to see that. So like, for example, in Tennessee, church-based institutions play a major role in informing individuals about legal aid needs. I've spent a fair amount of time in Montana in recent years because my wife's sister-in-law lives there. And also, the co-chair of my working committee was Allison Paul, who's the head of Montana Legal Aid. In Montana, they have bar coasters in the bars that address the issue of do you have any legal aid, do you have any legal problems in certain areas? And I can tell you, having been in Montana, there's a lot of bars. It's, I'm saying that as a compliment, not any criticism. And so that, again, it's just another, there's so many different approaches that have been successful. It's very, very interesting to see. Justice Bolger, one of the driving forces, and this again is something we may have already covered, but one of the driving forces behind these changes is unmet need. The justice gap is vast everywhere and slightly more pronounced in rural communities. What initial outcomes in Alaska or other states suggest these reforms are actually improving access to justice?
Fred, part of our rule required study and reporting of the system. And since the rule was passed, Alaska Legal Services Corporation has now over 200 community justice workers. So that's one measure of success, is it worked, the recruiting part of it worked. Also, the return seems to be phenomenal. When studied, a group found a 25-to-1 return on investment for this program, in addition to the $23 million of awarded food stamp benefits to worthy recipients. There's up to $16 million of additional benefits that were returned to the community, all for kind of a small investment to bring on these workers in the communities that they serve.
Excellent. I've got a question for all of you. For states that haven't yet moved in this direction, what would you say are the essential first steps? And I will point out that I think a number of our speakers have already suggested some of them, but I'm interested in your comments.
Well, I think you're right. Start with reading the report. You don't have to start from scratch. You know, it is often the case if one state has done a study or had a task force, then another one has to do a task force. The need is now and the need is real. So I don't know that you have to necessarily start with creating your own task force. There's a lot of information out there. The ABA has gathered a lot of that information. Other states, other folks that have talked. Start by reviewing the information that's there so that you can kind of get a jump start on what it is you want to do. Then I think, again, as many people have said, engage the stakeholders. You don't want to propose something and then find that you've got, you know, the state bar, the local bar, whatever, standing at the door raising concerns and issues at that moment. Try to involve as many of the stakeholders as early as you can in the process. And then finally, I would say, keep track of what is actually happening when you implement. There are states that have started things. There are states that have moved away from some of the first things that they did. Just because it didn't work out exactly as you had envisioned in the first instance doesn't mean it's a failure. It gives you an opportunity to kind of move along the continuum, make some tweaks or major changes, but you have to kind of track what actually happened so that you know whether you're solving for X and how you can continue to improve it.
Excellent. Anything to add?
I just wanted to add, I really think our clients are the place to start. By that, I mean our legal aid clients, because that is the place where the courts need the greatest assistance And that is the place where the lawyers have the most minimal objections to this kind of a program.
Excellent point.
And-
Justice Busby?
And having them tell their stories is extraordinarily effective too, to the people that, you know, as Michelle said, I think she laid out the plan beautifully. But once you've got all those people convened, they need to know, like, how does this really make an impact on people, so that they get buy-in of, you know, this is something that really does make a difference and that people are entitled to, and that will not make a difference for them, it'll make a difference for the court system. And for the state. So I think that's, you know, telling those stories, making it personal, bringing it home to people makes a huge difference as well.
Sure.
Yeah, you know, I thought it was fantastic. One of our speakers go ahead, Michelle.
No.
Okay. One of our speakers made the point that you just start speaking with other people. That's a first step, you know, and some experiences that I've had recently, I play tennis with a Dane County Circuit Court judge, and we don't talk about his exact thinking on a certain case. I read about it in the newspaper, but he will. It's again an opportunity to meet people and start. Gee, what are we doing to improve access to justice? You know, it can start with one conversation, and then I think you can also learn a tremendous amount from actually doing the work. So I had one client that I was recently working on a pardon application with. And, you know, you're trying to pick a location to meet at. And we made several appointments at my office, gave him directions how to get there. He wouldn't show. That kind of intimidated him. So ultimately, we decided on a Starbucks in Sun Prairie. Now, if you've ever been to Sun Prairie, it's a growing community. There are 5 Starbucks. Look, a little difficult to figure out which one he wanted to be at, but we got there. And but you know, it's a whole matter of going out and meeting the people, meeting the clients, you know, so.
Well, and just to pick up on that point, somebody referenced the free legal answers, which the ABA supports,
Right.
and the state has. And I participated just generally because that was part of how I was solving my pro bono obligation, but that has given me and continues to give me a firsthand look at the kinds of issues. And you know, we had the myth. People don't walk up and say, "My issue is I have a complicated
Right.
probate." Right? It's, "Hey, my sister has done X or whatever." And to be able to just even figure out, is this a legal issue or is this an interpersonal family dynamic issue? Those are the real things that are happening, and anything that we can do to kind of help people sift and winnow is really key, because the sooner you get to the problem, the better the outcome is.
Well, thank you all. I'm going to offer a reflection to summarize the key takeaway from the panel. We've heard that meaningful reform depends on partnership between courts, the bar, legal aid organizations, and the communities they serve. After our upcoming break, the program's going to pivot from theory and policy to practice to the people doing this work in the places where life happens. And we've already heard a lot of fantastic personal stories today. I love the one about the 85-year-old gentleman and the case that got won. I had, you know, it's like another example. I had a case in Montello many years ago where I showed up and the opposing lawyer wasn't there, so the clerk of court called him and said to me, "Oh yeah, he's just getting out of the bathtub. He'll be here shortly. He's a little late."
Hard to
So-
get that picture out of your mind.
Yeah, if you met him, that's a very apt comment, Justice. You know, it's another example of you just got to go to where the people are and serve them. And I hope we haven't taken the thunder away from the speakers that are going to be coming up, because I know we've got a lot of additional great stories to hear. So thank you all so much, and we'll take a break.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you so much.
Given how good all the speakers have been today, I won't say that we're saving the best for last, but we are ending on a real high note. For our final conversation of the afternoon, we'll hear from people powering rural justice every day, practitioners from across the country who are bringing the task force recommendation to life. To lead this discussion and to introduce our esteemed panelists, please welcome Ron Flagg, President of the Legal Services Corporation.
Well, thank you, Rebecca, and thank you for your leadership and partnership these last 4 or 5 years in putting this task force together. Please join me in a round of applause for Rebecca Rapp. And thank you to our panelists and speakers from the first 3 quarters of the day. They were uniformly terrific. Let's give all of our speakers and panelists a big round of applause. And finally, thank you to all of you for staying the course and coming back after not quite halftime, but maybe the 3-quarter break. I do think the panel we're about to hear will be a great cap to the day. This panel will illustrate one of our report's most transformative findings. That is that closing the rural justice gap requires the expansion of the definition of who can help. Because rural America faces an acute shortage of attorneys, our task force has recommended empowering a broader range of trained, supervised, non-lawyer professionals, such as we've heard, community justice workers, licensed paralegals, to deliver targeted civil legal assistance. And I want to underscore one point. That is our task force, and now you today, have already seen evidence that this approach can and does work. As has been described by Nicole and Justice Bolger, the Alaska Legal Services Community Justice Worker Program is already a success. I want to give you some more data that we haven't heard yet today. The program now reaches 42 communities, most of them very remotely located, most of them having few, if any, probably no lawyers, likely to never have a lawyer, but they have persistent civil legal problems, as does every community in America. They now, to serve the people living in those communities, have 500 trained advocates to help the people in these 42 communities. That compares to Alaska Legal Services having 24 legal aid attorneys for the entire state of Alaska. So think about sprinkling one attorney across, every 10,000 square miles of Alaska, and that's about what you have. And these justice workers have already resolved many issues, as we've heard about. The SNAP benefits issues, there were a huge backlog in Alaska, and we just heard today that more than $23 million of benefits have been freed up as a result of the work of these advocates up in Alaska. And Alaska is not the only state. Other states we've heard about, including Utah, Texas, Oregon, Colorado, Iowa, Minnesota, and New Hampshire, are taking complementary, not necessarily identical steps. Many of them are working with certified paraprofessionals empowered to assist directly in discrete areas such as family law, housing, and protective order cases. Now, just before the break, we heard from our colleagues from the bench and the bar about shaping policy and regulation at the state and national level to create pathways for new categories of legal helpers. And our next discussion is we're going to hear directly from the community advocates, paralegals, and justice workers who are already turning reform into reality and delivering justice where people live and work. Our goal for the next few minutes is to explore how community-based allied legal professionals can expand reach, build trust, and make justice local. Joining me today, please welcome from the nearest to the farthest from me, Hayden Ramsey, a community justice worker based out of Montana Legal Services Billings Office. Hayden covers a 4-county region, and in Montana, 4 counties is a big area. Next to Hayden is Carmen Stone, a legal advocate here in Wisconsin with Judicare Legal Aid, which provides free legal services to low-income people living in northern Wisconsin and Native Americans throughout the state. Next to Carmen, we have Dr. Alicia Mitchell-Mercer, the Chief Operations Officer with Frontline Justice. In previous lives, Alicia has served in the military and worked as a paralegal. And to my far right, Antonia Tello, paralegal with 603 Legal Aid in New Hampshire. Tony primarily assists clients with consumer law matters. Thanks for all of you being here. Alicia, let's start off with you. In the last conversation, we heard about policy. We heard about policy changes making your new roles possible and hopefully expanding the reach of the work you're doing to other states. Alicia, you contributed to these conversations in North Carolina through your involvement with your state's Equal Access to Justice Commission and the North Carolina Justice for All project. Now in your field building role with Frontline Justice, you're helping to scale these reforms nationally. How do these efforts, these policy efforts which you've engaged in, how do they translate into, real impact on the ground for the people and communities they're intended to serve?
Thank you for that question. First, I'd just like to say that I'm humbled to be here today. This is really a special occasion for me because my in-laws live in Waupaca County. So hi Mom. To answer your question, I'm going to start with a story since today's been a day of stories. So I was loitering in the reception area of a law firm about 10 years ago, and I was overhearing the receptionist answer the phone. I was actually consulting with them on a project management matter, and I could tell from the conversation that the receptionist was having that they weren't going to be able to help the person on the other end of the phone, and I could tell that it was urgent. I heard her say things like, this is what our fee is, and he was saying, I can't afford that, like, where else can I go? And she didn't have anywhere to refer him to. So I was working with some pro bono efforts at the NCBA, and I was like, let me see if I can talk to him and see if I can make a referral. Maybe I can get him some help. So I spoke to him on the phone, and what he told me completely blew my mind. So he said that he was in a relationship with a woman, and they had 3 children between the ages of 7 and 12, and that she had gotten involved with a bad gentleman who was a felon. He actually had a felony for a crime against a minor, and that she was also involved with drugs. And he had been to the sheriff's office, he had been to DSS, he had been to the court, and he did not know what to do in order to protect his children. He also was very concerned that she was going to take the children and leave the state. And he asked, where can I go? So I called a couple of lawyers that I have on speed dial, and I was like, is there anyone, is there anyone that I know that can take this case? And there was one lawyer named Don Brown. He's like, I take a lot of these pro bono cases. I don't have the capacity to do this right now. And so I said, well, what if I ghostwrite this complaint for him? Can you just trust me to write this complaint for him? And I had worked for this attorney in family law for 8 years, and he said, go for it. I'll read it, then I can get around the whole UPL issue. So I drafted the complaint, and I had to call out of state to the clerk to try and get information about the background check on the felon. We filed the complaint with the court, and the judge did issue an ex parte emergency custody order. By the time we had it served, she was already packing up to leave the state. And so we did get her served, but she was gone. It took 3 weeks to figure out where his children were. So on the day that he got a call from his youngest daughter, he called me and he said, I think that we have an address. And so we had to file another order or another motion with the court to ask the judge to allow law enforcement to go get these children from another state, which meant we also had to reach out to the other state in order to get the law enforcement to cooperate. He had the order, and I'm just handling things like in the background. I can't do anything on his behalf. So we send the order to law enforcement in this state, and they don't believe that the order is legitimate. So now I have to get the clerk on the phone, and I have to get the clerk to call the law enforcement. Long story short, we finally get law enforcement to go out and get these children in another state. And when they picked up the children were in a house where they were selling heroin. The middle child had been molested, and one of the children had been stabbed with a fork. And I often think what would have happened, and it's really hard for me to tell this story without crying. I often think what would have happened if I would not have been there to advocate for this father and his children. Now, this was 10 years ago. I'm still in touch with this man and his family, and his daughter just graduated from college, his oldest, and she's in a master's program. The youngest is pursuing an agricultural degree. Beautiful family. But what would have happened if I wouldn't have been there, or if I wouldn't have been able to find someone to advocate for them on this behalf? So I just wanted to share that story with you. I think that that's real impact. The other thing, and I know I have to be quick, is that in North Carolina, right? In North Carolina, we have an issue with an IOLTA funding freeze. And I think about the fact that Legal Aid of North Carolina has had to shut down their Rocky Mount office. And that is 6 counties. It affects 400,000 people potentially. I think about how community justice workers, as Nicole talked about earlier, embedded in those communities, could really help with issues when there are contracted services because there are fiscal or political issues that are going on. If we had community justice workers already in those communities, then the impact wouldn't be so great when there are funding restrictions.
Thank you. We hear numbers like 400,000 people who are now no longer going to have a legal aid office open in their area, and our eyes and minds glaze over. But those 400,000 people are like those 3 children that you helped so many years ago. Hayden, Tony, and Carmen, each of you serve in a legal advocate capacity without being an attorney. You've built relationships with clients, as Alicia has described. What does client service and representation look like in your daily work? Hayden, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, and thanks to the Legal Services Corporation for having me speak in front of attorneys and justices and my boss. So,
no pressure.
If any of you would like to come remind me about a homework assignment from, high school chemistry, please do so at the reception. So, on a day-to-day basis, I think my work. The direct client representation is certainly a part of it, but community outreach and communication with community partners is also a significant part of the work I do, as well as working within an organization like MLSA and doing colleague work. A snippet of that would be just to describe Thursday and Friday of last week. Started out my day doing some unplanned representation, had an administrative review that had happened a week and a half past its date when it was supposed to have occurred. So it was a surprise phone call from a worker with the state, and then had to get my client also on the call. Had a wonderful administrative review that did not go in our favor, however, satisfied the client's need for information, which was a big part of the call. And the client was terrified that the state was going to call her without me being with her. So I was happy that the state respected my wishes that they call me first. Went on to consult with my attorney supervisor over a specific Medicaid issue involving meds program. I won't go into the details, but it was an issue at the state level with our state disability determination services in conjunction with Medicaid, and the attorney and I had only had cases, both of us had only had cases on the periphery of the issue, so we kind of worked together to do some quick research and consulting and trying to parse out one of her client's issues. Jumped in my car, drove to from my rural county where I live to a different rural county that's a part of my service area, and held a public benefits clinic for that county in a community coffee house that's run by the Lutheran Church. Had planned to be dodging a lot of questions about H.R. 1 and all the changes coming, and instead was able to review MLSA's services, especially focusing on estate planning and probate issues and available resources on our website. And due to the crowd, got into Medicare and Social Security, and then just turned into a Social Security Administration representative, walking people through the steps of what has become the online process that they now prefer that Social Security beneficiaries use, as well as help dodging some questions that people had about how to get codes on cell phones. After that, ran back to another rural county and met really quickly with a local minister to discuss food access and food issues that are going on in our community. So that's just a snippet of it to show kind of there's a wide range of hats that I can wear and things that I can do, some that only maybe if you have a deft understanding of public benefits are directly related to the law. But with the knowledge and the support that I have from my organization, I can issue SPOT really easily for folks to be able to let them know when they do have a legal issue and what the next step may be.
Wow, I thought I was busy. Tony, what does your client service look like?
A day in my life usually starts with checking online to see what new cases I have, and once I see what cases I have, I like to go through. I like to really take a fine comb and see exactly what's going on. And typically the cases that we do get in, they're also already filed in the court. So I go ahead and make the next step and check the court docket, find a little bit more information, and prepare myself for any questions that the clients may have. After that, I'm able to call the client and be able to walk them through what may or may not be happening, if there are any dates that are coming up. But most importantly, when I do speak to each and every client, I make it a point to establish trust and make sure that they know that I'm there to listen and I'm going to advocate for them.
Thanks. Carmen, you're here in Wisconsin. What does your client service look like?
Yes. So I, in my role as a legal advocate at Judicare, and shout out to my boss, Beth Ann, who you heard from earlier. So I basically help fill the gap for individuals who are financially eligible for legal aid services, but who can't be offered full representation simply due to limited resources. So before the advocate program, we were having to turn away a lot of people that would otherwise be financially eligible because our attorneys were already at capacity. So even just a consult was not always possible. So basically, a lot of my job is providing consultations and other tools that these clients can use to help represent themselves in court, all of which I do under the supervision of a staff attorney. And my primary focus is restraining orders and family law, specifically cases that involve domestic violence, which is an area of pretty overwhelming need in our region. So that's kind of where I fit in terms of casework. And as others have mentioned, it's also a lot of community outreach. Family Law Information Centers, or FLIC, was mentioned by Judge Zell. We do one of those every week, as well as Law for Learners, virtual clinics, and many, many others that our advocates are involved in.
Yeah, Beth Ann, I think, talked very movingly about the 52 neighbors that she wasn't able to help because of lack of resources, and the number might be 102 if they didn't have you. Hayden, why is the civil aid organizations, and you're part of Montana Legal Services, how are they positioned to host and support the new types of legal helpers that we're focused on this afternoon? What about the culture, mission, or structure of your organization help these models take root and succeed?
Well, I am a new convert to the world of civil legal aid, the cult of civil legal aid, and understanding its importance. And I think once you learn about this field and its practitioners, you can't help but be inspired by it. It's an inspiring environment. We are all out there doing the work of true equality and justice in this country, in an area where I'm sure each of us has a story, either personally or from somebody in our close circle, where they didn't have access to the justice they deserved in the civil legal aid arena. So just from their nature, I think civil legal aid organizations are innovators. We're often filling gaps in justice, and so that has made us have to be scrappy or creative. That also comes with a lot of bravery, I think, in the choices that we make. We attract a lot of young folks to the work, young attorneys, but also, for instance, at Montana Legal Services, we have Justice for Montanans, our JFM members. They're AmeriCorps members who do 11 months of service with us. So giving those young people an opportunity to kind of dip their toes into understanding the world of not just legal aid, but all legal issues in general. And I think that keeping that kind of influx of youth and energy can help an organization to stay innovative and stay creative, because sometimes a new perspective will point out something that we've long accepted that maybe was a little wonky to begin with. At the same time, we have very tenured practitioners, attorneys who have been on staff for a really long time and bring that expertise as well as understanding of the specifics of Montana law. So if you bring those two groups together, I think you can't help but be innovative. Plus, I would have to mention that our esteemed leader, Allison Paul, who is in the audience, has also been such an innovator in the field. Our TAPE program, the Tribal Advocacy Incubation Project that Montana has, that trains lay advocates and prepares them to take the tribal bar in their specific tribal courts, has been wildly successful. I had the honor of participating in their mock trial on Friday and being inspired by all the work that they're doing. They've been at this longer than any of us in terms of lay advocacy and understanding the importance of lay advocacy in continuing community traditions, tribal traditions, ancestry. So all of those things have combined to make MLSA, I think, a wonderful organization to bring in a community justice worker. Plus, just because of the volume of work of civil legal aid organizations, I think we all have to be kind of thrown into the trenches together a bit. Everybody's somebody's legal aid at any given moment, or legal assistant at any given moment throughout the day, just because we get some pretty wild cases that nobody could anticipate. And yeah, so just that in the spirit, of course, of nonprofit workers and giving, I think that brings a lot to the table as well.
Well, that's terrific. Alicia, we've heard from the earlier panel how some states have been really quick and good about adopting justice worker and paraprofessional models, but and you have now a sort of a national perspective on this. Others have been slower to come around. As you've traveled around, what are some of the misconceptions about non-lawyer legal advocates, and what has the field learned about how effective they are?
Well, I feel like Rebecca covered most of the myths earlier, so I don't want to necessarily repeat the things that she covered. I will say that
I don't have a great memory, so go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'll say a few years ago, I previewed thousands of public comments from lawyers. It wasn't for fun, it was for school. And there were some themes, that came about when I was doing that research. So what I did was I pulled just some brief excerpts from a couple of the comments that I reviewed. The first one is with regard to public harm. And so the quote here is, "I have strong concerns about the harm that will come to parties using non-lawyers. I am not worried about the impact to attorneys and mediators because the program will actually increase litigation and court congestion due to errors, necessary modifications, needing to vacate judgments, etc. But from my understanding, the evidence from Alaska and Utah and Arizona and Ontario and England show that there hasn't been an increase in public harm, and in many cases, there's actually been a decrease. And my thought has always been that, what is the greater harm? Allowing people to have help from another tier of legal service provider that is trained and educated, or giving them no help at all? Myth 2, we talked about the two-tier system and efficacy. So the quote here is, this is one of my favorites. So you want to create a two-tiered system of legal representation, one of well-educated, licensed lawyers for people who can afford them, and a second tier of unlicensed, unregulated people of questionable education. For low-income people, your proposal would exacerbate the inequalities experienced by low-income people in our country, not fix them. So in truth, I think we know that we already have a two-tier system. In 76% of state civil cases, at least one party is without representation. And those are the cases that we see. So from the same jurisdictions that I talked to you about a moment ago, those jurisdictions are showing that there is a higher client satisfaction than even with the traditional attorney-led services. And so I think that the question is, what is the right type and amount of training that is needed? Is it 4 years of law, or 4 years of college and 3 years of law school, or is it something else? And I think that we contend that it is something else. And then myth 3, quickly, this notion that this has never been done before, and if we do this, then the wheels are absolutely going to fall off and the country is going to fall apart. So I've always been interested in this because I see legal work being done everywhere that I look. And so I think about, for example, the real estate agents that are drafting and negotiating these purchase agreements. I think about insurance agents that are like interpreting coverage. I think about tax preparers and enrolled agents and other authorized non-lawyers that represent clients before the IRS and 14 other federal agencies. I also think that it's interesting that in 32 states, magistrates can actually adjudicate issues related to domestic violence and eviction and commitment cases. So in North Carolina, I can't represent a person who is involved in domestic violence before the magistrate, but the magistrate who doesn't have to have a Juris Doctor can decide whether or not she should have an order for protection, which is crazy to me. And then in at least 5 states, including our neighbor to the south in South Carolina, police officers act as prosecutors for the entire misdemeanor process, so from first appearance through the plea or trial. And so I take the position that non-lawyers are already doing this work, and we need to be doing more of this work to serve the people in this country.
Thank you. Tony, how does your role complement or strengthen the work of attorneys and other staff within your legal aid organization?
So at 603 Legal Aid, I work as a paralegal alongside of 2 other paralegals. And while I am focusing on consumer law matters, my 2 other colleagues work for family law matters as well as housing matters. And I think the best thing that we're all able to do is give advice and counsel. I know specifically for myself, when I have a client who needs assistance with filing a response, I'll be right there to help them with it. And it's great to be able to create a sense of relief for them once that process is all set.
Thank you. As we've heard today, many of the justice worker models throughout the country are built upon the notion of neighbors helping neighbors. It's the idea that local advocates who live and work in the same communities as their clients can have an even greater impact than outsiders offering support. Carmen, how does being rooted in the community help clients trust? And I underscore the word trust because, as Rebecca described earlier, trust is critical. Trust you with deeply personal legal problems.
So I think that even though our service area covers many, many rural counties, 33 northern counties, and I obviously only live in one of those, the idea of living where we work still applies. So for example, having spent much of my life living here, I do have personal experience with how difficult it is to access resources and maintain any kind of lifestyle if you do not have access to a working vehicle or a reliable internet connection, and you are located in central Wisconsin, especially in the winter. So I do think that having employees, advocates, and community justice workers with that sort of background, being from here, as well as our organization's mission being aimed at serving those rural communities specifically, does help us be more connected to them. So,
can you give me an example of someone from your community, engaging with you or Judicare because of your proximity or knowledge of their community?
Yeah, so one example that I can think of is an individual that I encountered at a clinic appointment, actually, and who she was experiencing abuse from her husband, and she also had a cognitive disability. So pretty quickly, it was clear that the level of service that she needed was not something I was going to be able to offer her in a 30-minute virtual clinic appointment. So she often needed things repeated to her and explained in sort of different ways before she would fully understand. And so she did become a client. And as time went on, it became obvious that if you were too direct with her or too sort of abrupt, she would get extremely flustered and emotional, and she would start voicing her concern that she was being a burden to us, which would really derail whatever it was we were trying to accomplish. So I remained very involved in the case, even though an attorney was assigned to represent her. And that's because I think as an advocate, I was able to approach her with less of that sort of inherent power differential that exists when someone's working with an attorney, and which seemed almost very triggering for her. So I think that enhanced ability to meet people more on their level is something that is a unique benefit of involving non-attorneys in casework.
Hayden, in such a vast and rural state like Montana, what are some of the practical advantages of a community-based advocacy system?
So I do represent just a small portion of the state. Montana Legal Services Association represents the entire state, but I have a 4-county service area that I represent and live in. And I think there's a lot of benefits to that. It helps me to understand the clients just on kind of that lived experience level. Our winters are also different. There is no public transportation. And even some grants write in that, like for, I think of VAWA grants, they write in that you can assist survivors with bus passes. And when I worked as a DV advocate, we were always like, great, thanks. It's not meeting the people where they are with the funds. So even just something like that, understanding that a bus or public transportation is not going to be an option. However, at the same time, understanding that we do have a great local service that helps seniors and Medicaid participants, as well as anybody in Carbon County, at least one of my service areas. There's one in Park County just for seniors, but I know that there's one in Park County, free transit in Park County for medical appointments. I know that there's transit in Carbon County available to residents, and I know the organizations that run them. I just have that kind of in-depth knowledge of the areas that I serve, what's available, areas where we might be lacking some services. I think rural communities can suffer a lot from not just people parachuting in, but duplication of services based on not understanding community needs. And as a community justice worker, I can have that kind of next level insight into what the community really needs. I can also turn to clients, as I did actually, I was not working. I had someone, I'm a Special Olympics coach, and somebody came in from the parking lot at our regional games and pulled a rumpled version of my card out with a handwritten direct line number to reach me that I did not give them, that they somehow had. And when they heard the name Hayden from Red Lodge, they were like, is this you? And I picked up a new client in my off time. But throughout talking with that person, just to get a quick to see if it was even something I could assist with, I said they lived in Red Lodge where I live, and I turned him, and it was a housing issue along with some heating assistance. And I said, well, do you have a lease or do you have a Red Lodge lease? And he immediately knew what I meant, because we love to have handshake and out-of-state landlords in our area. So just little things like that can make a big difference. In that one instance, he trusted me. He knew I was someone that spoke plainly, that he could understand, that related to him, and that didn't have any judgment about the fact that he lied about being a carpenter to secure housing in a really difficult area. But I think that can make a huge difference. And there's still going to be driving, a lot of driving involved in my job, because I do think rural people do appreciate as much face time as possible, especially our elders. We've moved all of our systems to online, and I understand the efficiency, and I can understand the draws, and I know everybody wants AI and everything. However, there's a huge swath of our population that needs that in-person touch, and that's never never going to use an app and never going to use the internet. And as our offices and services have fled from our rural areas, especially in Montana, sometimes even me just bringing information from DPHHS to someone in their hometown can be the difference between them understanding that they might be able to access a public benefit and them not understanding that. So there's just a lot of practical application that I can meet, but we need more of me.
So a key element of these initiatives is training. The report recommends training community members, staff, and volunteers without formal legal credential to serve as first responders and navigators for rural people in need. Alicia, I am told that lawyers can sometimes be protective of our turf. I haven't experienced that firsthand, but how is Frontline Justice working to build and promote consistent standards or certification frameworks that states can replicate to ensure quality and accountability?
Well, first, I'd like to tell you what we're not doing, I think. So Frontline Justice and the partners, we're not aspiring to copy the attorney model, because I think that we understand that 50 years later, 50 years and 400% more lawyers later, we still don't have enough lawyers to resolve the crisis. I think we also know that 7 years worth of college and $100,000 worth of law school debt isn't a recipe for scale. So what we're trying to do is we're designing a framework that identifies the real skills and supports that people need to be able to do this work in their communities. And then we're trying to get away from relying on arbitrary standards that are focused more on maybe making the reforms more palatable to lawyers than useful to communities. So Frontline Justice has put together the National Community Justice Worker Task Force, which we launched in January of this year. And that brings together the legal aid and justice sector. It brings together stakeholders from health, social services, and community-based organizations, and also adult education and workforce development specialists like Ascendium and Education Design Lab. And we're also working with the Design Advisory Council, which is made up of justice workers and the community justice worker supervisors that helps us keep those standards grounded in their real-world practices. And so the goal here, I think, is to make sure that we're putting together a program that's going to be low barrier, it's going to be directly tied to the work that they're doing, and I think we want it to be rigorous where it matters, but we don't want there to be so much red tape that people who are perfectly capable of doing the work can't get in to do the work.
Thank you. Carmen, what does good training look like from your perspective? What supports are necessary to ensure quality and accountability?
So at Judicare, at least, good training for advocates has meant having kind of an introductory phase where we learn the basics of the substantive area of law in which we serve, as well as how to provide guidance to individuals navigating legal issues without crossing over into UPL. So at first, we spend a lot of time shadowing other staff, while anything client-facing is very closely monitored by our attorney supervisors, until they're confident that we're ready to have some more autonomy and can exercise good judgment. After that, we do continue to work very closely with our attorney supervisors. So we go to them whenever we have a question that requires legal advice, and to approve anything that we put in writing before it goes to the client. And then I will also just say that, at least at Judicare, despite most of us not having any sort of formal legal education, most of us do come from backgrounds in other sort of law-adjacent community organizations, like domestic violence agencies. So people drawn to this role do often have relevant work experience already. So I think having attorneys at our firm who recognize that and see it as an advantage has been very critical to us having a successful program.
Thank you. Tony, the term supervision suggests a hierarchical relationship. In my experience, the best supervision is a much more collaborative process. Can you talk about your experience with your colleagues in New Hampshire?
So I work with one supervising attorney, Lee Goldberg, who I absolutely adore, and he is the best attorney I've worked with, and I can say that confidently. It's great to work with an attorney who wants to work with me as an equal, especially with our consumer law unit and our low-income taxpayers project. Both projects are crucial in the state of New Hampshire, and both of us want to be able to find the best solution for each situation. In the community specifically, we've gone to pretty much every single county and given a presentation on scams and identity theft, primarily to an older audience. And by doing so, we let them know about the different things to look for when it comes to being scammed, as well as going to ESL audiences and explaining how to file their taxes for the year, or even to those who've never filed taxes before, how to go about that process. It's really important to work with someone who is willing to teach you, as well as let you do what you do best and connect with clients.
Thank you. I'd like to end our conversation on an aspirational topic. Nicole very movingly, shared or invited us all to at least think about what the world would look like if this initiative that we've been talking about grew. And I'd like each of you, in a minute each, to share your vision for what rural justice would look like in your communities, let's say 5 to 10 years from now, if these models that you're part of continue to expand. And Carmen, why don't we start with you?
So I would love to see advocates at every courthouse and also have more of a virtual presence that's more cohesive, so anybody could just get help. And I think that this would also create more collaborative relationships between court systems and the legal aid firms or other community organizations, employing them, and ultimately maybe even the court would see the value in having non-attorneys involved, in that it reduces the burden on the court system and makes the process move more smoothly, so maybe even having their own advocates.
Tony, what does the future 5 to 10 years look like in your head?
So right now, 603 Legal Aid is working to develop a community justice worker pilot program. And that's to lay the foundation for a broader use of community justice workers statewide. And we plan to start a specialized domestic violence education with crisis centers, crisis center staff, and from there we'll be able to expand. And also, we are able to build on from important work from our sister organization, New Hampshire Legal Assistance, which in recent years has helped us establish a rule for paraprofessionals to represent people in court, specifically for family and housing matters.
Lisa, you've been thinking about how to expand this initiative nationally. What does that look like 5 to 10 years out in your mind?
I think in my mind, I would like to see community justice workers everywhere people already go for help. I think that's how you're going to scale the work. So I think having them at community centers, at health clinics, at community colleges, at the Urban League, at United Way, like wherever we can put them, where people are already going to help, just being able to cross-train and upskill the people that are already helping, I think would go a long way. I would also like to see a world in which, a couple of weeks ago I was at the Camden Coalition on the medical legal partnerships, and I would like to see a world in which courts and lawyers and community justice workers work together as a care team, the way that doctors and nurse practitioners and community health workers work together, so that they can see us as partners in helping to resolve the access to justice crisis instead of as competition.
Hayden, what's your vision?
Well, I had an answer to this question, and then I ran into Nicole at outside the elevator at the hotel, and I kind of went, "Whoa." But I think part of my vision is that adaptability of the community justice worker model, not just at a state level, but within organizations and even within your own mind. It's a growth process, and I think that's what's so exciting about it and how I can have so much scalability, because even just some of the comments that were made by my fellow panelists inspired me to think of new ways and new avenues to really inject this work into our communities. So I guess more and more is the answer. And ultimately, philosophically, I think we're at such a crux where laws seem so far beyond most people's day-to-day lives or their personal experience. But laws are reflect the values of a society, and a society is nothing but communities. So they are human-based. We made them. we choose, usually, to respect them, and we uphold this legal system that supports them. And it's become to the point where the laws are leading the people, and I guess the complete inversion of that back to where law being in service of people is really the easiest way to answer it without having to get into specifics that I don't know just yet.
Well, thank you all. I think as we've heard, not just immediately, but throughout the day, at its heart, the work we're talking about is neighbors helping neighbors. And when I think one of the themes of our report is when we bring justice closer to where people live, we strengthen not just those people we're trying to help, but the entire community. And that's what Justice Where We Live is all about, making sure that no matter your zip code, you can get the help you need it when it matters the most. So please join me in thanking our panelists for a great presentation. And the good news is you can talk to them more next door. We're going to be moving for our reception, and to bring us to a close, Rebecca.
Yeah. Thank you, Ron, and thank you to such fabulous panelists. Really appreciate it. It was very, very moving. What an incredible afternoon. What an incredible program, and what an incredible, incredible community. Thank you to all of today's speakers, to the Legal Services Corporation, and to our Rural Justice Task Force members, and each of you in this room and watching online. Thank you also to the fabulous Overture Center team for making our vision of what today could be a reality. What we've seen and heard today shows that rural legal deserts are not defined by scarcity, and instead are fertile ground ripe with solutions for closing the justice gap nationwide. To tap into this remarkable potential, though, we need to act. You didn't think I'd forget about those to-do lists, did you? My kids certainly know that I would not have forgotten. The task force report and this event are only as valuable as what we, and by we, I mean I and you, do with them. They mark a starting, not a finish line. Developing, let alone implementing to-dos, can be daunting. Fortunately, the task force report makes this easier. It breaks down the extensive compilation of data, storytelling, and lessons it includes into targeted recommendations. In addition to using the task force report as a guide, you should also remember that you're not alone. You are supported by a community, many here today, united by a shared commitment to fulfilling the nation's promise of justice for all.